Afternoon. Can I remind members about social distancing, etc., when in the chamber and when moving around? The first item of business is portfolio questions. The first section is environment, climate change and land reform. And can I say if a member wishes to request a supplementary note to press the request to speak button, and if you're remote to put R in the chat function. Question 1, Jamie Green, please.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government for its response to the Climate Emergency Response Group's Interim Assessment of Progress report.
Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham.
I'm delighted that 90% of this government's climate emergency response has been rated as meeting or making progress towards meeting the CERG proposals, with CERG noting the disruptive impact of COVID-19. Our 2021 programme for government demonstrated our commitment to building a green recovery with transformative investments such as £1.6 billion in heat and energy efficiency and a £100 million Green Jobs Fund. And I welcome CERG's contribution as an opportunity to reflect on our work to deliver a green recovery and a just transition to net zero, especially as we finalise our climate change plan update.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? But the report also says that in 14 of 20 key proposals identified by the group, they were rated as having concerns with pace of progress or critical gaps. And it's not just down to COVID, because they commented, and I quote, "We were disappointed that there was not more progress in the development of policies and programmes in the months before the pandemic, losing valuable time." What is the Minister's assessment of why so many key policy areas were missed? And can she confirm when the Government will deliver the key recommendations as outlined in this report?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't recognise the characterisation of the member in terms of our response to the CERG asks. We've been working closely with the CERG over quite a considerable period of time to ensure that we can progress all the various aspects that we both agree are absolutely necessary. The members should of course be aware, however, that there are always issues and concerns within very particular areas that may make progress slower in some areas than in other areas, and that is only to be expected. The Climate Change Plan update, which will be published soon, will deal with a number of other aspects, and he might want to look out very carefully for that. But I believe that Scotland is making excellent progress, and indeed the CERG accepts that as well.
Two brief supplementaries. Claudia Beamish, followed by Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the Cabinet Secretary set out when the £11 billion of annual public procurement is to be mobilised to support the climate emergency response? Given that this received a red rating in the CERG, and this is absolutely key to supporting low carbon business.
I did say stop. I did say a brief supplementary. So we'll stop with the 11 million, please.
Right.
Well, I think, as the member will know well, that is an issue which extends beyond my portfolio. I am aware that procurement was one of the areas that CERG flagged as there not having been enough done yet, but we do continue to underpin our commitment with significant action. The CERG assessment on procurement doesn't reflect the innovative legal and policy levers we've already embedded to drive climate ambition in this area. And nor does it reflect that much of what needs to be done cannot be done by government or procurement alone. We are urging strong leadership through a range of channels. And of course, it is one of the areas that has been hit quite hard by COVID.
Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the UK prepares to turn its back on our EU neighbours, how will the Scottish Government ensure that our climate efforts continue to be cooperative, inclusive and international, even in the face of Brexit?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Scotland is and remains, in the face of an unwanted Brexit, a strong believer in international cooperation and remains committed to working with governments at all levels to drive a just transition to a net zero world. We will continue to work closely with a diverse array of governments and organisations to achieve our collective goals. We will not accept being cut off from our friends in Europe and the world, and we will work with our international partners to deliver an ambitious, inclusive and successful COP26 in Glasgow next year, including as European co-chair of the Under 2 Coalition.
Question 2, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the allocation formula will be for local authority funding for flood defences.
Cabinet Secretary.
Funding for flood schemes is linked to the prioritisation of actions set out in the flood risk management strategies and plans, which are developed by SEPA and local authorities in collaboration with other relevant bodies. The next round of strategies and plans will set out the work that needs to be prioritised for action by local authorities within the 2022 to 2028 flood risk management cycle to reduce the risk of flooding to our communities. No decisions have yet been made on what the allocation formula will be for actions prioritised in that next round of strategies and plans.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer, and of course she will be aware of the significant incidences of flooding in my Cowdenbeath constituency, such as in Cardenden, in Rosyth and Dalgety Bay, and indeed across Fife. Does the Cabinet Secretary not consider, therefore, that Fife should be a priority for flood risk management investment? And also, how will the UK Government's proposed 5% cut to the Scottish Government's capital budget impact on the level of funding that will be available?
Cabinet Secretary.
I am, of course, aware of the flooding both in Cowdenbeath and the wider Fife area, and my sympathies go out to all of those impacted by that flooding. SEPA and local authorities are currently reviewing and updating the strategies and local plans, as I indicated in my earlier answer, and these will be published for consultation next year. As I said, these strategies and plans will set out the work that does need to be prioritised. The 14 strategies and plans ensure long-term planning to manage flood risk, and this will include considering what actions in Fife need to be prioritised and funding. Obviously, capital investment can have one of the biggest positive impacts on economic growth, so a cut at this time is especially harmful. However, despite the UK Government's decision to cut the capital budget, the Scottish Government will proceed with the plans that we have recently set out, which include an investment of an extra £150 million in flood risk management over and above the already committed £42 million provided annually to councils.
Question 3, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussion it is having with local government regarding fly tipping during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cabinet Secretary.
I wrote to the member, I think, last week about the action we are taking against fly tipping, but I'm content to reiterate that it is, of course, illegal, dangerous and unnecessary, and that we continue to work with local authorities and key partners on a range of prevention and mitigation activities. At a national level, our waste management marketing campaign and web resource sets out how the public can manage waste at this difficult time, including messages on fly tipping prevention. In addition, SEPA has been taking action to ensure those offering waste collection services do have the correct permits to do so. And we plan to invite key stakeholders to a roundtable discussion in the new year to discuss proposals for future action on fly tipping, and that will, of course, include local authorities.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. And you mentioned, Cabinet Secretary, in your written response to me, that the national tool for reporting fly tipping dumpers run by Zero Waste Scotland. But there is still some frustration under reporting at the national scale, with some councils estimating reports to dumpers reflects only 8 to 10% of the actual fly tipping instances. Whilst I appreciate the efforts you're making with stakeholders to tackle this issue, the fragmented approach across local authorities
And get to your question, please.
is creating a postcode lottery. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to join with me and NFU Scotland and others in the creation of a national database for fly tipping?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think in response to concerns that have been expressed, we have worked with partners through the Waste Sector Forum to consider current and future measures, and a range of actions, both local and national, have been or are being progressed through household communications and communication and enforcement measures to tackle illegal waste carriers by SEPA. I mean, obviously, an enormous amount of really good work has been done right across this sector, and I want to pay some tribute to all of the people involved in it. The legal responsibility for littering and fly tipping does remain with local authorities, with public organisations and with landowners. But as I've indicated, because of the level of ongoing interest in this subject, the meeting that we will have in January will be open to discussing all key proposals for future action on fly tipping. And I suppose I really just have to remind everybody that you know, this activity is undertaken by individuals who need to take more responsibility for their own actions.
Question 4, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its progress in meeting its targets of achieving net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scotland's emissions in 2018 were down by 50% since the 1990 baseline, which is halfway to net zero. Scotland continues to lead the UK as a whole and is second only to Sweden in Western Europe for emissions reductions. As the Committee on Climate Change put it in their recent Scottish Progress report, and I quote, "The Scottish economy has decarbonised more quickly than the rest of the UK and faster than any G20 economy since 2008. Emissions have fallen rapidly while the economy has grown."
David Torrance.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Central heating is responsible for up to a third of greenhouse gas output, and as a challenge it must be met as we work towards net zero targets. The Green Hydrogen Project, H100 Fife, is the world's first hydrogen network which will bring 100% renewable hydrogen into homes in Leavemilth, providing zero carbon fuel for heating and cooking, and puts Leavemilth at the forefront of clean energy revolution. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that hydrogen has a major role to play in helping us achieve net zero emissions by 2045?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, obviously decarbonising Scotland's heat supply whilst maintaining affordability for customers is a critical part of delivering a successful energy transition and a fundamental step towards achieving net zero ambitions. Hydrogen does have the potential to replace direct use of natural gas for domestic and commercial space and water heating in some areas of Scotland. Projects such as the H100 Fife, to which we have granted £6.9 million, will of course be vital in accelerating our efforts to understand more about the costs of hydrogen systems in comparison to other options and how hydrogen systems would be safely constructed, integrated and operated.
Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Climate Emergency Response Group highlighted the lack of progress in tackling climate change and says a culture change is required with leadership at all levels. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that this must include government ministers? Cabinet Secretary.
Of course, it includes absolutely everybody in this chamber, everybody who works in this Parliament and every individual across Scotland. Nobody is excepted. However, nobody can do it on their own.
Very brief from Ruth Maguire, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary offer an update on when she intends to publish the Climate Change Plan update and on Scotland's indicative nationally determined contribution, which I note has been welcomed by Scotland's NGO community ahead of COP26?
Cabinet Secretary.
Both of these things will be published in the very near future.
That's lovely in brevity. Question 5, Jeremy Balfour, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on whether it has met its climate change targets that were set out during Session 3 of this Parliament.
Cabinet Secretary.
The emissions reductions targets set by this Parliament, including the Members' Party, of course, who voted for them, are the most ambitious in the world. Since the passage of the 2009 Climate Change Act, 9 annual targets have been reported upon. Those for the years 2014 to 2016 were met. Those for 2010 to 2013 and 2017 to 2018 were missed. It is, of course, always disappointing to miss a target, but these world-leading targets are intentionally set to provide an extremely stretching pathway to net zero, and it is long-term progress which is most important, and I refer the member to my earlier answer on the progress that Scotland is making.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer, but the target to provide 11% of heat demand from renewables by 2020 was set in November 2009 by the SNP government and voted by this Parliament. Over the last 11 years, we have seen a small progress, but nowhere near enough to come even close to the 11% target. In 2019, only 6.5% of heat came from renewables. Isn't this just another example of the SNP government talking a good game, but actually never delivering anything?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I just need to refer the member back to the comment I made that was a direct quote from the Committee on Climate Change. Scotland has made remarkable progress right across the board, including in decarbonising its energy sector. And I'm very sorry that the Conservatives don't seem to be able to bring themselves to recognise that.
Very briefly, Sarah Boyd, please.
What action will the Scottish Government take to make sure that the journey towards net zero and low carbon heat doesn't push more families into fuel poverty, given the House Conditions Survey figures last week that showed that 1 in 4 Scottish households were still living in fuel poverty before the pandemic?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, that is one of the key issues that we do discuss on a regular basis, and that the Just Transition Commission is also looking at very carefully, because, of course, that when we make these decisions, and it's, you know, it does have some implications for some of the way we make decisions, that we cannot be in a position where a decision that looks on paper to be absolutely the right thing to do in terms of the climate will necessitate real upset and deprivation for a lot more people. So keeping that balance is absolutely something that we are doing and keeping an eye on. And it involves obviously not just my portfolio, but a number of other portfolios across this government.
Question 6, Alistair Allen.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessments it has made of the impact of the devolution of Crown Estate revenues to coastal communities.
Secretary.
No assessment has been made to date of the impact of the funding provided to local authorities from Scottish Crown Estate revenues, as this information is only starting to become available. We will undertake the appropriate assessment and publish details once the necessary information is fully available.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. I have been able to see the real benefits in my community when Crown Estate revenues help form part of an emergency fund to save many worthwhile charities affected by the recent subsea cable break. How have Crown Estate revenues been used to help businesses and third sector organisations more broadly affected by COVID?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we have been doing everything we can to support those affected by COVID, including people and businesses in our coastal areas, which are often reliant on tourism. That's why we widened the remit of the Coastal Communities Fund to include COVID relief, and agreed with COSLA that the allocations already provided to local authorities to date can be carried over into 2021-22. By relaxing the rules for the use of the Crown Estate revenues, we are enabling local authorities to use these funds to directly support local coastal businesses, including third sector organisations facing the full force of this economic shock from the pandemic.
Question 7, Linda Fabiani.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what importance it places on local initiatives to reach environmental and emissions targets in the surrounding communities.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government recognises that local communities have and will continue to make a huge contribution to reaching environment and climate targets. This is reflected in our programme for government, where we committed to build on our Climate Challenge Fund by developing community climate action hubs and to support the development of 20-minute neighbourhoods, both of which will support local areas to contribute to the transition to net zero and live in better, greener communities. We will also introduce low emission zones in our 4 biggest cities to improve local air quality, and have provided an additional £1 million to build on our successful Scotland Loves Local campaign.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of local initiatives like Smart Sustainable East Kilbride, which exists to revitalise the town and to promote zero-carbon initiatives. It's already achieved some success. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that local initiatives are extremely important in this regard, and will she encourage colleagues in local government and national government agencies to recognise their worth, support their efforts, and confirm that a small investment often brings about substantial reward?
Cabinet Secretary.
I agree with Linda Fabiani about the importance of organisations such as the Smart Sustainable East Kilbride. I feel that in pre-COVID times the question would have been followed by a request that I come and visit, and my accession to that request, and unfortunately we cannot do that in this current set of circumstances. It's been successful in driving forward East Kilbride as a centre of low-carbon innovation and in providing green jobs training for local people. And I do strongly support the importance of local initiatives in our national endeavour towards net zero emissions by 2045, and will continue to advocate for collaboration between local and national agencies on such efforts. To demonstrate our commitment to localism, we are developing the Climate Action Towns initiative alongside undertaking the Town Centre Action Plan review, placing emphasis on how Scotland's town centres can contribute towards our climate ambitions.
Question 8, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to ensure that recycling and food waste collection services suspended by local authorities due to the pandemic are resumed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Local authorities have worked hard to maintain essential waste and recycling collections through the pandemic, while making significant operational changes to ensure safe working. And I do want to thank all involved for their efforts. The vast majority of local authorities have reinstated those recycling and food waste collection services that were temporarily suspended at the outset of the crisis. Only 3 councils report challenges in reinstating separate curbside recycling or food and garden waste collections, and we continue to actively engage with COSLA, local authorities and other partners to identify and address remaining challenges to waste service provision.
Patrick Harvey.
The Cabinet Secretary is probably aware that Glasgow City Council, instead of reinstating their backcourt food waste collection services, are removing those bins from backcourts and expecting people to use bring sites instead. This will inevitably lead large amounts of food waste going straight into incineration. Is this because the requirements on local authorities are too lax and permit this, or is Glasgow City Council breaching the requirements that exist on it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I am aware that Glasgow City Council is one of the 3 councils that is continuing to have difficulty in terms of their reinstatement. Local authorities remain responsible for and are best placed to make decisions on the provision of local waste services, taking account of their legal duties to provide a comprehensive recycling service for households and any short-term pressures caused by the pandemic. I'm sure that Patrick Harvey would be quick enough to condemn me if I tried to override local authorities' responsibilities in any area. I am aware that Glasgow City Council has recently undertaken a trial for flats and tenements in North West Glasgow, which is intended to allow them to assess alternative means of delivering food waste collections. And it will be for the Council to consider the results of any such trial and to decide the best model for fulfilling the legal requirements for food waste collection in future.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes question on environment, climate change and land reform. I'll move straight on now to portfolio questions on rural economy and tourism. Question 1, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government what guidance it is providing to the holiday accommodation sector regarding the relaxation of the COVID-19 restrictions over Christmas.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing. We relieve Cabinet Secretary. Ms Cunningham, I'm not expecting you to answer these. I'll have to suspend briefly while we connect with Mr Ewing. We're resuming business now. Mr Ewing, could you just say something so I know that we can hear you? You're muted, Mr Ewing. Can't hear us? Mr Ewing, can you hear me? No. I think we'll have to suspend again. Right, sorry, I'm suspending again. Resuming again. Mr Ewing, can you hear me?
Hello.
Oh, well.
Hello.
I thought you were going to get a round of applause, but they're mean-spirited in here. Thank you, giving him a round of applause.
Hello.
We've struggled to... Oh, you can't hear me.
Hello. Hello. Yep.
I'm about to suspend again. Off and on business. I'm going to suggest that we move on to the next item of business. So we'll have a short pause and we'll go on to get the speakers here. Then we'll do the next item of business, which is the Ministerial Statement of Coronavirus Act. And then we'll try to get back into portfolio questions. I think that makes sense. So if you bear with me. Budget update statement. Sorry, budget update statement. I'm announcing the wrong thing. Budget update statement, but then we can perhaps go back to portfolios because we can't have this nonsense. Right? Thank you. Point of order, Joanne.
Everyone, but I have other meetings arranged for the rest of the afternoon. On the basis that I was going to do my question now and then go on, what advice can you give us about when you would update us and when we'd be required to be back in the chamber?
I'll do that as soon as I can, obviously. This is ad hoc at the moment, so once we've got the next item of business, I'll be in a better position to know what Mr Ewing says. We'll try to put portfolio questions in at a time when members would be here to do them, just as we will this debate, if that makes sense to you. So we'll try to accommodate you, Ms Lamont, and anybody else who's got a portfolio question. Yes?
No one would want to be disrespectful to the chamber by not being here.
No.
I'm sure you'll appreciate the position that we're in, but as long as there is dialogue between ourselves and the chamber desk, that would be appreciated.
There certainly will be. There certainly will be. We'll get this in hand. It's not the end of the world. It's just a small hiccup.
question about whether the people who are in...
Well, we're back with your problem with your card. There's a bit of sabotage going on with you there, Ms Smith. You have to move and put your card in another place because it has to be on the record.
Point of order, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm sorry to be difficult. It's just a question on behalf of those who are following on, particularly as a statement, as to whether they've had sufficient time to read the statement that will have been given to them with prior notice. It's just a question about that.
I'll find that out, won't I? I'm like you. I'm finding out as we go along, so I'll let you know. Oh.
It's a point of order in order to be helpful. We haven't even received the statement yet, and there is less than, I think, 20-odd minutes to go, which is unfortunate.
Right. Well, yes. Didn't know that, now I do. Right. I'm suspending for 10 minutes so we can get some order back into the afternoon, if you'll bear with me. Thank you.